Hiya folks, we live in a world where everything is a fandom back in now. Cars the movie, got a fandom. Cars the game, got a fandom. Cars the cars, got a fandom. Got milk, got fandom. Has got a fandom too. A pretty riled up one at that. They're all obsessed with these brands Jimmy and Curly. Oh, but this isn't a brand. This is absolute cinema. And not knowing something like that can get you killed in some fandoms. Especially the mouthwashing fandom, where nearly all talk about this absolute cinema has one big glaring piece of the puzzle that cannot be ignored. Mouthwashing was put out in 2024 by Wrong Organ, placing it firmly in the genre of which isn't too surprising since Wrong Organ's previous project, How Fish is Made, is about the genre on Steam should be changed to It's a Metaphor in binary. What in the dear God anything but Jim Anya was that?
Oh fuck, this is just like The Boys, Season 1, Episode 1.
What TF?
Well, since we're both stuck here, do you want to play TF2?
What TF? 2.
It's a video game?
What's a video game?
That! Mouthwashing, I love that game.
No, you misunderstand. This is not a game, it's absolute cinema.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, don't let my happy little accident distract you. I want to hear what you have to say about this cinema.
We follow a 4-man, 1-woman spaceship delivery crew with their mascot Polly. The ship crashes, leaving them stranded, only themselves, a cargo bay of mouthwash, and their captain, left mangled and nonverbal, unable to explain anything. Told in non-linear fashion through the eyes of 2 characters, one being an unreliable narrator, you play as Captain Curly in the days leading up to the crash, and as Jimmy James Jimbles McJimster Germa. Or just Jimmy. Or take your pick from this list instead of his real name. Wow, this fandom has so many names for this guy. They must really like him. You play as Jimmy in the days after the crash. Its biggest strength is playing with your sense of confidence throughout, learning new information as we jump between pre-crash and post-crash, seeing the consequences of things you're about to do before you actually get to do them, and knowing you'll have to do them anyway. There's puzzles and dialogue and purposely clunky jank action combat, so of course it's gonna have twists, turns, metaphorical representations of the mental state of our main characters, blah 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 blah. Mouthwashing's available in this cool bundle that says it'll make you feel good. Wow. No. The game's twist is that you're actually playing a horrible, horrible person the entire time. I fucking hate Jimmy. You can see all the signs from the start, but things won't become clear until the non-linear story gets through everything in the past, the present, and the future. It's non-linear, so actually I don't know if you can call it that. Jimmy took advantage of Anya before the crash even happened. Anya went to Curly, Jimmy doesn't wanna... So he crashes the ship on purpose and blames it all on Curly. The remaining crew is killed one way or another. Jimmy abuses, chops up Curly, and Jimmy finishes the equation by taking himself out of it in a desperate, misplaced bid that still fails taking responsibility. Still don't get why he chopped Curly up. He could have just, made some baked beans.
Dude, I look like baked beans on toast.
One of the strangest interpretations I've seen is of seeing Jimmy and Curly to be more than just best buds. Some think the game implies they're toxic yaoi together. I can see some of it pointing at how Curly stood up for Jimmy no matter what, how Jimmy really highly respects Curly an immense amount, wanting to follow in his footsteps and defending every action he does by putting it on Curly's shoulders first. Putting all that together makes one horrifically tasting toxic yaoi flavored sandwich. What this fails to account for is the language Curly and Jimmy use when they're talking about each other in many scenes. They don't read very romantical when Curly seems more concerned by fear than anything else about what's going on with Jimmy and the rest of the crew. I can definitely understand how people got to this conclusion, but by the end it's clear this isn't, or at the very least shouldn't be encouraged with that label, as it downplays the fully abusive dynamics present. Exploring those dynamics, characters hurting each other in a relationship, is fine. It makes sense to explore how people can hurt each other in irreparable ways, since that happens all the time in real life, both platonically and romantically. By examining it in the stories we tell, how else will we learn or understand the real world around us? Downplaying the abusive behavior of Jimmy as a quirky relationship quirk, with even quirkier quirks to go with it, like being a terrible person, fuck you Jimmy, is done by a very small minority. But discussion around it with or without romanticization isn't an uncommon sighting. Post-crash, Curly has to be kept on a strict diet of 10 painkillers a day, or more, depending on how much pain he's in. He's at least on a 3 on the pain scale. Jimmy is almost always the one to do it. He's very forceful on giving Curly his pills. Forcing pills down his throat, the screen darkens, but we hear a struggle as Jimmy does it each time. Definitely leaving Curly in a kind of pain that the killers won't stop. Interpreting this as a sexual thing for both Curly and Jimmy is something I've seen and wish I never saw. Sexualizing that is a way to take it. Don't take it like that. I think it's very inappropriate to sexualize certain characters and their dynamics in this game, especially when Jimmy's involved. Jimmy is a manipulative, antisocial, and unself-aware person who perpetuates a cycle of abuse, further victimizing himself and taking advantage of people whenever he has the chance. Jimmy takes his mental health evaluation as a joke when Anya gives him one, replying to questions and snide remarks about being attracted to toy horses, which are implied later on in his psyche to be genuine feelings he has about toy horses.
Well, no, it's not quite like that, as amusing and kind of unsurprising as that would be to assume.
Wait, like on God, on for real?
Jimmy makes that statement to make Anya uncomfortable. It can be brushed off as silly, and I think that's the point. It's the kind of comment that someone like Curly would laugh at thanks to its absurdity, but the audience later has some hints that lead to that comment having a much darker meaning. Polly's image is paralleled with that of Anya. Anya is the only one in the Tulper's crew not featured for even a moment during Jimmy's hallucinations, at least not directly. Meanwhile, Polly is an animal, an object that Jimmy expresses desire for with little consideration for Anya's discomfort. He sees Anya the same way, to be objectified and later a vessel for the root of all of his problems. It haunts him. Polly becomes the monster of Jimmy's mind, with each instance of a disgusting, deformed Polly becoming more and more glaringly obvious it has to do with Anya and the unborn child he was faced with. I feel that some fans took these moments as the primary horror aspects of the game, which was extremely frustrating to watch. At times it completely changed the way certain players would interpret the game and dismiss it as merely horror in the more traditional sense. In fact, Anya's character in general is often dismissed or reduced to little more than a victim when she's so much more than that. Towards the end of the game, Jimmy encounters Polly in a more direct confrontation, one that is closest to his original form, undistorted and real in a sense. Polly addresses Jimmy in a very snarky, almost condescending way as he forces Jimmy to face what he's done in midst of his spiral. Most importantly, his text is blue, a near exact match to Anya's speech color throughout the game, if not for being a tiny bit lighter. He literally cannot face Anya in any other way in his hallucinations like he does the others, because he doesn't feel any differently about her. She's hidden in the ID card scene. She's the monster, the vessel, the persecutor, the object. He destroyed Polly. He destroyed Anya. In Jimmy's head, the way he hurt Polly, a mere object, is incomparable to the sheer amount of damage he did to the others, who he actually saw as people.
Anya being nothing but a toy at the root of his problems is indicative of how Jimmy treats her throughout, with him shaming her, making her out to be worthless, and taking advantage of her in the most selfish way a human possibly can. Lest I forget that Jimmy forcing the pills down Curly's throat is a clear parallel to his treatment of Anya. Practically all fandoms have AUs. Unfortunately, some are too evil to think of for long. I do like the mouthwashing AUs with a lighthearted take on the series, and the classic everyone kicks the shit out of Jimmy AU. Fuck you, Jimmy. Extremely off limits is anything involving Jimmy and Anya. While it isn't right to compare which ship would be worse in terms of people being abused, and I'm no fandom police, I wouldn't even look at Jim Anya from 1,000 miles away. Erasing Anya's experience in the story and treating it as a blossoming romance or one where Anya is gonna keep the baby with Jimmy by her side is outright despicable. I'm not commenting on the character of the people behind these AUs. They don't deserve to be shamed for thinking this stuff up. I'm just saying that it's really very weird, bad, and gross to be thinking about this. But there's nuance in the grossness. A possible hypocritical set of words I'm just alright saying. These AUs are controversial by nature, with little room for nuance in them. Yet the discussion around the fine line between the downplaying and romanticizing of abuse and how people can be willing to accept it is almost completely lost on both the creators making this problematic art and the people who respond to it. While I won't say it's right to attack anyone, a lot of them kind of had it coming, but no, That doesn't mean they deserve to be attacked. As much as I disagree with a lot of misinterpretations in this fandom, they should be critiqued and not harassed. Nuance in any fandom can be a difficult concept for many to grasp. With something so mainstream, there's going to be lots and lots of opinions on the work, with the voices of people significantly less passionate about it, at times drowning out those who are that passionate. Then there's also the Mouthwashing fandom, filled with passionate people who still miss every little piece of all that yummy nuance-flavored pie.
Nuance. Ah, yes. Such a delicate consideration in analyzing not just media, but the complexities of the human experience. Something the fandom often does not weigh. Like at all. Yikes. Firstly, I think it's important to note what mouthwashing is at its core.
Absolute cinema.
A psychological horror that shines a glaring light on the insidious ways in which rape culture and, further, the patriarchy serve to harm everyone under its crushing weight. Mouthwashing focuses on its cast in a way that I feel is often overlooked. Every man in the crew fails Anya. Every man contributed to the fate that beheld the Tulper and its crew. It's a soul-crushing narrative that was doomed from the start. One of Mouthwashing's most heavily criticized characters is Curly, and for good reason. However, the fandom often takes his extremely flawed character and takes things too far, oftentimes even bordering on what could be considered ableist. Curly's post-crash state, say that 3 times fast.
I'll try. Curly's post-crash state.
Curly's post-crash state is sometimes deemed a proper punishment for him to suffer, the physical pain being a fair trade for the ways that he failed Anya, and was what some deemed a rape apologist. While I agree that Anya was failed, I don't think by any means that Curly's physical injuries should have ever been treated as a punishment. If you want to explore what was truly punishing for him, it was the loss of control, an experience in which his parallels Anya's. There are 2 instances in which Curly has to be faced with powerlessness. However, these things don't necessarily directly correlate with his injuries. It's never seen as a good thing that Curly is hurt to such a degree. I feel punishing Jimmy and AU's purely for the pain or taking glee in Curly's pain misses the point. Curly never maliciously harmed Anya or wanted Jimmy to get away with everything. He was a coward, absolutely, but there is no divine form of punishment in the form of purely physical pain. It's that he had the choice to do something and then suddenly he didn't. After his freedom to do the right thing was ripped away, now forced to be a bystander, Curly was at the mercy of a now completely unhinged Jimmy, as was the rest of the crew. Bodily autonomy torn away, Curly repeatedly vomits up pieces of his own flesh as he's faced with the unmasked monster he let run amok. He froze up after Anya's pregnancy was revealed. He was afraid of pushing Jimmy too far. Curly wanted to protect Anya, but for one reason or another, it's clear that Jimmy gave Curly reason to feel afraid, to feel stuck. This doesn't absolve him of his actions, but too many fans often completely brush off Curly's abuse and depict him as some raging misogynist or justify his state. In the words of the allegedly but also apparently allegedly not Edmund Burke, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. The unfortunate truth is, most men will engage in behaviors that enable rapists. Sometimes you never even see it coming, or perhaps brush off the ways others might be doing the same thing, deeming it little more than their natural brash behavior, or simply thinking they would never do that. Anya was failed by every man on that ship, and that includes Daisuke and Swansea. Especially following just after Mouthwashing's full release, I noticed that Daisuke and Swansea were treated in a similar manner to Anya. The 2 were deeply beloved, especially due to their familial bond developed over time. And honestly, I agree with the rest of the fandom, it's a great dynamic. Just look at them. Swansea, the disgruntled mechanic of the Tulpar, far from his kids, forging a familial bond with his well-meaning, if not a bit wet-behind-the-ears intern Daisuke. He basically takes him on as his own son. It's a really sweet dynamic that kind of fits into the found family trope that fans and fandoms love. Fandoms also typically tend to love the grumpy characters warming up to the adorable cat they said they'd never adopt type thing. Now, before getting any further, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that Swansea and Daisuke are monsters like Jimmy. I think in a more subtle way, they're about in the same position that Curly was left in. Neither of them are or would be innocent. If they were, then mouthwashing wouldn't have been such a tragedy. Swansea is deeply flawed in a way that fans can often relate to or find amusing. There's no shortage of men I've met in my life similar to him. He's a family man, a good guy, but he did not help Anya. I don't really think he tried to kill Jimmy for her either. It was all for Daisuke. The cryopod was for Daisuke. The mechanic and his apprentice had developed a much stronger bond than Anya and Swansea ever do throughout the small time we see them interact. He cared enough to risk his life for Daisuke. With Daisuke, typically the interpretation seems to be he'd do the right thing if he knew. But we don't know. You never know. And we never will. We want to think that these two would do the right thing. It's the most cathartic thing to imagine them all beating down on Jimmy. Justice is served! Mouthwashing wouldn't be the tragedy that it is without knowing that every man completely failed Anya. As fun or trustworthy as they might seem, for one reason or another, it is crushing to know that as much as we trust the men in our lives to do the right thing, sometimes they just won't, and the monster gets away with all of it.
I know what you think of this predicament of yours. Poor you. It's misunderstood. Polly says,
Mouthwashing is an emotional, terrifying experience, wrought with social commentary on what people do when the external structure keeping us all together is tested and what happens to our failing internal systems. You know, like the fandom, which has an interesting disconnect around uncomfortable subjects. Almost shocking for fans of such an incendiary story, but then again the Omori fandom exists. How the fandom goes about discussion of Jimmy and his actions is as if he's an evil, mythical figure who should only be referred to with a comical nickname. In a way, it reminds me of the persistence of rape culture, not mentioning you-know-what outside of innuendo or in some kind of joking manner. It's admittedly absurd to compare the two, but I don't think it's all that ridiculous when rape and abuse is so frequently dismissed to this day. In essence, the fandom really reminds me of the game itself and what its story represents. What's the point of all this? I think people should get along, or something like that. I also like fighting people to the death. Both of us do.
Obviously, we're just talking about Gmod here. I've never want to hurt a fly, but you better watch your back.
Fandoms have evolved over time into being everywhere. With every fandom comes a unique set of ideas, concepts, things that fit in and things that don't fit in. It's just up to the fandom members to figure out what's best in tackling what sticks and what falls. That made sense, right? My brain's been so rotted from the fuck too that I really don't even know what's going on anymore. I think what we're trying to say here is
Fuck you, Jimmy.
Fuck you, Jimmy.
fuck you, Jimmy.
Baked beans on toast.